Muy buenas tardes. Vamos a dar comienzo a la cátedra Volcanología de la Geociencia a la Geoingeniería. Me da mucho gusto presentarles al doctor Donald Bruce Dingwell. Él es Honoris Causa por la UNAM, director de Ciencias de la Tierra y el Ambiente de la Universidad de Munich. Vamos a escuchar una breve semblanza del profesor. Bueno, antes quiero que le dé un gran aplauso, por favor, al doctor. Y ahora vamos a conocer un poquito de su vida académica y posteriormente vamos a escuchar la cátedra, por favor. Gracias.
Muy buenos días, tengan todas y todos ustedes. Es para mí personalmente un gusto estar aquí en mi facultad. Yo estudié aquí en la Facultad de Ingeniería, soy actualmente el director del Instituto de Geofísica. Mi nombre es Hugo Delgado y tengo el placer de dar algunas líneas de lo que el doctor Don Dingwell ha hecho. Para que ustedes tengan idea de la personalidad que el día de hoy nos visita. Siempre es un honor para la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México conferir el grado de doctor Honoris Causa. En general se entrega este reconocimiento a personalidades del mundo académico que la Universidad Nacional considera que tienen el perfil, que han hecho una contribución muy importante en su área. Y al doctor Dingwell el día de ayer en una ceremonia bastante interesante, recibió de manos del señor rector, el doctor Enrique Graue, el grado de doctorado Honoris Causa junto con otras varias personalidades. Y el doctor Dingwell el día de hoy viene a platicar con la comunidad de la Facultad de Ingeniería. Él estudió Geología y Geofísica en la Universidad Memorial de Terra. Él nació en Canadá. En Terranova se graduó con honores en 1980. En 1984 obtuvo el doctorado en Geología por la Universidad de Alberta, también en Canadá, con el tema Silicate Melts y sus implicaciones en la petrología ígnea. Trabajó en el Laboratorio de Geofísica del Instituto Carnegie en Washington por 2 años como investigador postdoctoral y en la Universidad de Toronto por 1 año como profesor asistente. En 1987 fue contratado como asistente del director del entonces nuevo Instituto de Investigación Experimental en Geoquímica y Geofísica de la Universidad de Beirut, en Alemania, donde obtuvo su venia legendi en Geoquímica en 1992. A partir del año 2000 fue nombrado director del Instituto de Mineralogía y Petrología de la Universidad Ludwig Maximilians de Múnich, donde fundó el Departamento de Ciencias de la Tierra y el Ambiente, del que es todavía el director hasta la fecha. El interés científico del doctor Dingwell ha sido describir y entender los magmas y su impacto en los sistemas volcánicos. Sus investigaciones originales y novedosas cuentan con más de 450 artículos científicos y sus citas rebasan las 21,000 citas. Si ustedes lo buscan en Google Scholar, pues van a encontrar una cantidad impresionante de citas a su trabajo. Y por esta situación de sus citas es posiblemente el geocientífico más citado del mundo. Su contribución ha tenido un impacto definitivo en el desarrollo de la volcanología, particularmente en la volcanología experimental, disciplina que desarrolló gracias a su creatividad e innovación. Don tiene una reconocida trayectoria como funcionario, además de ser un gran académico. Ha sido funcionario y representante en el gremio geocientífico ante sociedades académicas profesionales internacionales y ha sido un incansable promotor del intercambio académico y de la colaboración internacional. Él fue secretario del Consejo Europeo de Investigación de 2011 a 2013 y desde ahí él gestionó el Tratado Bilateral de Ciencia y Tecnología entre la Unión Europea y México. De hecho, gracias a él, este programa que arropa a geocientíficos en general, científicos en general y geocientíficos en particular, sigue vigente al día de hoy y con oportunidades para los estudiantes y los investigadores jóvenes. Ha dirigido grandes proyectos de investigación nacionales y europeos, así como ha promovido iniciativas de investigación en ciencias de la Tierra sólida. Su historial como formador de jóvenes geocientíficos es sobresaliente, tiene más de 30 años de experiencia docente y ha supervisado estudiantes de todo el mundo, incluyendo estudiantes mexicanos. En total son 39 doctores que ha formado y es un entusiasta promotor de los cursos masivos abiertos en línea, conocidos también como MOOC. Su curso Volcanic Eruptions, Material Science, suma más de 20,000 participantes desde que se inició en el año 2013. Ustedes están invitados a buscar vía Coursera este curso. Es gratuito mientras que no pidan el certificado. Sus investigaciones sobre volcanes mexicanos ha trabajado con colegas de él y con colegas de aquí de México en el Popo, en el volcán de fuego de Colima y en el Chichón, y ha establecido una interacción con investigadores y estudiantes mexicanos, incluyendo los que están relacionados con la Fundación Humboldt. Sus aportaciones científicas lo han hecho acreedor a numerosas distinciones. Hay una muy larga lista que no voy a leer, pero aparte de haber recibido ayer el doctorado Honoris Causa por nuestra universidad, un día antes de venir a México recibió la medalla Werner en Alemania. Así que pues él ha sido merecedor de varias distinciones. Y aparte también el doctorado Honoris Causa por parte de la Universidad de Alberta, Canadá, y de la Universidad en Londres, Inglaterra, que también le han otorgado este título. Su obra ha influido profundamente en nuestra comprensión de las propiedades de los silicatos, de los vidrios y los magmas, y en el impacto que estos ejercen en los procesos magmáticos, volcánicos y recientemente sísmicos. Su enfoque experimental para la manipulación de magma y lava a alta temperatura y presión permiten cuantificar los mecanismos físico-químicos que dan lugar al volcanismo explosivo. En particular, los relacionados con descompresión súbita tienen implicaciones en procesos de yacimientos petroleros. Así que no es nada más en el área de la volcanología, sino otras aplicaciones en donde podemos ver la influencia de su trabajo. Su exitosa trayectoria refleja tres cosas. En primer lugar, su talento para la experimentación creativa y para identificar y medir parámetros críticos. En segundo lugar, su generosidad para la investigación colaborativa. Hay una afluencia constante de científicos y estudiantes que visitan su laboratorio de volcanología experimental en Múnich. Y en tercer lugar, sus trabajos sobre volcanes mexicanos en colaboración con científicos y estudiantes nacionales e internacionales muestran su genuino interés en México. Eso último ha permitido establecer una cooperación fructífera entre geocientíficos mexicanos y alemanes. Entonces, el día de hoy tenemos el honor de escuchar la charla del Dr. Dingwell, Volcanology from Geoscience to Geoengineering, y pues quisiera pedirles que lo recibiéramos con un aplauso.
Well, thank you very much, Hugo, for the hard work. The lecture will be easy compared to the introduction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the recent past, but I'm going to talk also about the future, so it'll be speculation on how engineering will be necessary for the future of volcanic studies. This is the pitch, okay? This is the idea. I hope some of you will believe me. inspiration I think we have. It's global. The volcanoes are everywhere. They are the black dots. Many people in Germany think, oh, volcanoes, that's something for Mexico. Not for Germany. About 10 years ago, European airspace was famously closed for 10 or 12 days, resulting in almost $1 billion in damages because a small Icelandic volcano had special meteorological conditions and just blew, like a cigarette smoke, blew a line of ash towards European airspace and shut down everything. Almost everybody important had to go somewhere by plane within those 10 days. So the propaganda effect in Europe was enormous. Okay? Just to remind you, this aviation situation is one of a huge growth. Of course, many people say this is a great environmental problem, the huge growth of aviation. But there are tens to hundreds of thousands of people in the air at any one time. And many of them fly directly over lines of volcanoes. So we try to understand volcanoes. And I recommend to you, if you want to take some distance to your problem, go into a class of children, maybe 7 years old, and ask them all to draw your problem. And after you stare at these 30 children's diagrams, I guarantee you'll develop some further depth of appreciation and understanding of your problem. This is one example, of course. Do we know this? Do we know this? What is this? The questions immediately jump into your mind when you see that a child is trying to draw something that you are trying to draw. Anyway, there are basically 3 legs on the stool or on the chair which support modern volcanology. There's field observations, which is the classical volcanology, where you have world-class experts, a large number in this city, in this university, and certainly in this country, famous for. Okay? You have theoretical and numerical modeling, like everything else. We also have volcanic eruptions and supercomputers every day. It's the time we live in. So this is advancing. And then we have a few people, not more than 100 worldwide, who work on experiments to try to ground truth, the ideas about volcanoes. So the big business of volcanology is very technological. It is actually engineering. It is how do we monitor volcanoes? And Professor Delgado and Professor Arciniega are here, and both of them are experts in volcano monitoring and interpreting what the signals from volcanoes mean. And you can see here that it's very different signals. We have a salad, I would say in English, remote sensing signals, deformation, seismic, so acoustic information, deformation from the ground, other geophysical measurements which can be made, like magnetotellurics, conductivity studies of the Earth's surface, gas measurements, gas monitoring, changes in the water table, all these things change. When one thing changes on a volcano, all these things change. This is where most of the money goes in volcanology. It's important. Without this, we will never know the truth. But all of this requires interpretation of complex signals. What do my signals mean? How do I interpret my monitoring situation for civil defense purposes? This is the really hard part of the game, and it's very close to an engineering style approach, the analysis of risks, the analysis of uncertainty, all the things that you learn in addition to your physical science is all in. Okay? But largely speaking, there are scientists who are doing this and not engineers. So we need more help. That's my message to you today. So we break down the problem very simply in order to do simple experiments. We always must break down the problem into pieces of the problem which are able to be answered. The trick to doing a good experiment is not to be good with your hands. Some people think that. But the trick to doing a good experiment is to ask the question in a way where the answer means something. And you know, if somebody from the press or if a child comes to you or somebody comes to me with a rock and says, explain this rock, the first thing I have to say is, what is your question? What do you really want to know? What can I answer for? basic principle around our experiments is a very simple physical phenomenon in materials. It is the glassification of liquids, the fact that liquids have a viscosity, and therefore our volcanic liquids have a viscosity. This viscosity has a relaxation time in the sense of Maxwell. It takes time for the system to respond viscously, and this relaxation time is insufficient when volcanoes explode. So, in two sentences, you know why volcanoes explode. It's because they cannot viscously relax on that day and in that place. Okay? And so they become glasses, and the glasses are what we pick up off the ground after the eruption. Ash is glass. Pumice is glass. The lava flows are often glass. Okay? This is an example of an electron microscopy shot showing the tortured geometry of the foams. They've obviously been through something. They're drawn out. This has all happened over 1,000 degrees Celsius, and then they've been quenched somehow. So they didn't collapse viscously. They maintained their broken aspect when we got the sample. It's a great advantage for us because if we see how they broke, we have a chance of putting them back together again and understanding how they broke and why they had the explosion. And here you see in an optical microscope which can show transmission of light. You can see through the ash particles, and you can see that there are different pieces of the mixture, the physical mixture of phases which make a volcanic ash. You have crystals, which may be opaque, which we show beautiful cleavage here, so you know it's a regular structure of a crystal material. Or you have pieces like this, which look like broken pieces of glass. And they are broken pieces of glass. They've been frozen at the explosion, and they still look like broken pieces, so they have not relaxed after the time. The properties in these systems are incredible. It is a physical-chemical challenge of the first order to model these systems, because the properties of these liquids, these volcanic lavas, are so variable with temperature and composition that a whole science is based just on describing temperature and composition. Okay? What you see here is the viscosity plotted versus the water content of the lava. There's a lot of water in these volcanoes, but it almost all comes out during the eruption. And so a volcanic liquid, they start with 6% water, but then on the way up, it loses its water towards the Earth's surface, and as a result, the viscosity hits this catastrophe. It's the rising viscosity, which is a chemical effect of the influence of water on the viscosity. Okay, so we literally have a solution here between water and rock. We take the water out, the viscosity goes up. And this is exactly what happens when the stuff decompresses to the surface of the Earth. So it's the perfect storm. It's the perfect setup for a catastrophe. It's just the conditions we have on Earth. On Venus, where we also believe we have volcanoes, it's probably very different because the surface pressure on Venus is 90 bars, temperature is 450 degrees, whole different planetary situation. This is the terrestrial part, okay, the one that we all worry about. The flow regime, this is a flowing system, and so during the flow, the distribution of pressure or volumetric stress in the system depends upon height in the chamber, it depends upon the viscosity of the liquid, because the viscosity controls the distribution of the flow pressure. The viscosity and the gradient in viscosity determines the strain rate and the gradient in the stress, which supports the strain rate. You have a complex system which would have the dimensions of a bamboo stick. It's very long and it's very narrow. At the bottom, you have a low viscosity. At the top, you have a high viscosity. It's all coming out at the same speed. It has to. You can't move anything in the bottom without doing something at the top. But the forces which are required to move something at the top may be 1,000,000 times the stress of that at the bottom, because the viscosity is 1,000,000 times the viscosity of that at the top. It's a spectacular physical challenge. And just to give you an example of how these lavas, or how these magmas die, there are two examples. The first is a lava flow, which slowly dies,
you see that it's moving as a tongue of lava. If you defocus your eyes, you see it's flowing like a fluid viscous. You see the viscous element clearly. But if you focus in on a block falling off the surface of the lava flow, you see the brittle element. So we're going from viscous to brittle. You see it live in front of your eyes in the lava flow. Okay? That is something which is not too dangerous. People were walking back and forth out in the picture as you saw. But unfortunately, the same process of going from viscous to brittle, ductile to brittle, can be explosive. And when it's explosive, then you have the situation that there is no escape. And this is an example from Causa volcano in southwest Japan.
About 10 times bigger than all that came before.
And you see that the flow creates a cloud, which grows and grows and grows and grows. You see it again. And it grows because it's hot. It's just greater in density than the atmosphere. There's rock plus hot air. And then at some point, it sucks in so much cold air that it stops flowing. And you see it here in a second. The advance of this pyroclastic flow will stop.
By the time the team came into the village, records the scene. Maurice, Causa, and 41 others are dead.
You see, there it is. It stops and it blows up. Okay, enough drama, I think, for a lifetime. Good. So, how do we try to contain the problem? We try to tame the beast, right? We try to simplify it. So we break it down into physical chemical experiments. We determine the viscosity. Here, we want to know the effect of composition and temperature on viscosity. So we use things that you would find in a material science laboratory anywhere in the world. These are high temperature viscometers, which measure the viscosities of glass melts. And this is a dilatometer, a vertical dilatometer, which allows us to determine viscosity by creep experiments, very slow deformation experiments. We produce, for a range of chemistries of liquids, here you see silica content from 40 to 80%, and here you see alkali content from 2 to about 15%. And you can see a wide range of chemistry of natural liquids. And here you see a viscosity curve for each one. So these viscosity curves you can see these viscosity curves are not Arrhenian. That means we need a lot of data to describe the curvature. It took 2 decades to get a model for this. Now I'm going to take you across this crisis. I'm going to walk you across the glass transition in the laboratory and show you what happens. Normally I would show you a slow and fast death of the liquid, but this is today I only have enough time for fast. So there it is. We will go fast. This is the gentleman who started all this work. He was a Russian of Tatar origin from the Crimea. He was Mikhail Alitibirov, and he worked at a volcanological institute in Petropavlovsk in the Kamchatka of Russia, which is volcanic. Here's the water device. This is our volcano in the basement in downtown Munich. You have magma chamber, which you can see here, glowing up to about 900 degrees Celsius. And it is a autoclave. Many of you will already recognize that this is a pressure seal and a pressure vessel. So we can literally take the magma and put it back in the earth under pressure and under temperature. Okay? And that's what we do. We set up an experiment where we have a pressurized bubbly magma, and then we have air which is not under pressure, and then we fail the interface such that there is a decompression wave which runs into the sample, and we see what happens. We just decompress, like opening a bottle of mineral water that you just shook, okay, or cold. I'll say 1 or 2 words about the threshold, 1 or 2 words about the speed, and 1 or 2 words about the permeability. And I'll show you a video of actual decompressing magma. So at the end, you can tell me whether you think this is engineering. I don't know. Here we go. This is a dome rock, which is being decompressed. And what is happening? It's failing brittle. Okay? Classic observation sure you have rock physics at this university. And this brittle failure, which you just observed, is at room temperature in a plexiglass vessel, so you can see it. But we do the same thing at 1,000 degrees Celsius in a steel vessel, which is magma. Okay? And this will show you in more detail the complexity with which this process takes place. The dust that you see is new volcanic ash being produced on the spot by decompression of rock. Okay, so this is how we make ash. And you can stare at that and think about how complex a model of this process will now have to be a flow regime in this process. And then above all of that, we get the products of the volcanic eruption. And what does it look like? It more or less looks like a volcanic eruption, which is that the hot gas comes out and then is followed by what we would call our pyroclastic flow. Broken rock, which is coming out now at kilometers per second. This is a slowed down time-lapse video. And because this process goes on and on and on this time scale, we can actually make science out of it. We call this an explosive eruption, but actually it's a steady state flow which occurs and runs on until some source reservoir is cut. Okay? How much pressure do we need to do it? Not much. To fragment these rocks, really, in tensile mode, we need about 30 megapascals for solid rock with no vesicles, but you only need 3 megapascals for rock which is highly porous. And these foams which produce pumice are highly porous. Okay. How fast? The whole process is called explosive volcanism. But actually the speed of the failure of that front is slow. It's on the order of tens of meters per second. I don't know if that sounds slow or fast to you, but we know from estimates of ascent rates of magma that we can supply magma from several kilometers depth at 10 meters per second, no problem. That means the supply and the fragmentation are in balance. This is probably why volcanic eruptions can go on for hours, days, and weeks, because the plumbing is just right, less, so that it constantly throws out ash until some reservoir is depleted. Permeability is an issue because the basic problem of the system is to get the gas pressure out. The volcanoes actually do a very good job of removing the gas pressure. Most of the time, they're not erupting. During that time, they are pumping the gas out. Everything is fine. Yesterday looks like tomorrow. Gas is monitored, but people are monitoring gas. There are huge reservoirs of degassing in the interior of the Earth. But sometimes things go wrong. And if you want, you can look about an explosive volcanic eruption. You can say it's like an industrial accident. It's like a explosion due to dust in a factory. Okay? These things go wrong, and the gas takes the mountain with it when it goes. That's what an explosive eruption is. And we've gone so far with these experiments. This is the last picture I'll show you about the recent history of what we've done in experimental eruptions. That we see things in these eruptions, and this is the beauty of experiments. You see things that you didn't expect. You see things that were unexpected, and therefore you have to change your priorities, shift, and take advantage of new observations. And one thing that we saw here, it took us a while to get the camera to work, is the natural electrification and discharge of ash particles coming out of a fragmentation experiment, where all we did was decompress the rock, and we ended up with electrical discharge. When we went to the Faculty of Engineering and the people who were studying lightning research at the Technical University of Munich, they said, "Oh, very nice. How did you apply your voltage?" We said, "We didn't do anything." And you should have seen the look on their face when they realized that this experiment generated electrical discharge from decompression of rock. It was like, can we work with you? Because for them, it's a whole new frontier. And they are now working together with a colleague of mine, Why am I standing in engineering and talking to you guys? It's because it's clear to me, after decades of experience, that we are on a collision course with engineering. head-on collision course, like in the railway movie, with engineering, okay? We don't want too many casualties. We need engineering input for the future of volcanology. This is just one simple example. You all know the story of ash shutting down air traffic, right? So it turns out that the problem that we face is essentially one of engineering proper materials in the turbine blades. It's material science. Turns out that the problem is the ash goes into the turbine. The turbine is hotter than the volcano problem, because this ash was a liquid in the volcano. So it becomes a liquid again. And this liquid sticks to the turbine blades, infiltrates into the ceramic, high temperature ceramic materials, starts to eat the ceramics. And this is why they shut down air traffic when volcanic ash is on the flight. Okay? So we have a whole project working on engineering new materials which will withstand the attack of volcanic ash better. You have kinetic considerations, can I slow this process down? You have mechanical considerations, can I mitigate the mechanical damage to this mixture of ash and ceramics so the plane can get back down on the ground again? Yeah? You have all these issues associated with this. You also have the thermodynamic consideration, can I make these turbine blade thermal barrier coatings out of something that the volcanic ash will not eat? There's little hope for that, because at these very high temperatures, the thermodynamics are such that volcanic liquids eat almost anything. Okay? So here we are bumping into engineering every time we turn around. Now I want to show you what I think is the next big one. And somebody's going to do it somewhere. I'd love to still be alive to see it. We're pushing to get it funded as a major funding from the European Commission. And our way of selling it is geothermal research. So in Iceland, it turns out that a large part of their energy comes from hydropower. You know that, probably. Big rivers, is a small country. But a large part of their energy also comes from geothermics. And the geothermics that they use are very high temperature geothermics. And it means a high enthalpy. The potential of high enthalpy is like 10 to 1 compared with what we do in Munich. In Munich, they do 200 degrees or so. In Iceland, they're going much higher in temperature, and they want to go even higher. So what they want to do is they want to drill down into a magma chamber, but they don't want to go into the magma. They just want to go in front of the magma and stop. And they want like 200 or 300 meters left, and then just sit there while the magma cools and pumps heat into their source, okay? This is John Eichelberger. He's been believing in drilling volcanoes for 50 years, and he's done it occasionally. And he is the lead man on trying to get this to happen. He's a professor in Alaska. Look at this picture, and I'm sure I can guess what your reaction to this picture is, because even though this picture is about volcanoes, my reaction is the same as yours. It's horrible. It's way too complex. It's way too arrogant. It assumes that we know things that we don't know. Every one of these pictures would make you believe that somebody's been down there and has mapped this out as a geologist, right? We're geologists. No, they haven't been down there. This is what they think might be going on. And the difference between these models, just optically that you can immediately appreciate, is the uncertainty that we have in what's going on down there. We don't know. And as if to prove it, the accident occurred a few years ago in Iceland where they were drilling to test this geothermal idea. The geophysical evidence from seismology largely predicted that the lava, the internal lava in the earth, we call it a sill of lava, that this would be hit at 4.5 kilometers, and they hit it at 2.5 kilometers. So they went right into it. They opened up the active lava at depth. And this lava actually started, they pulled the drill stem because they were stuck. That's what you do when you get stuck. You try to move it a few times, which won't be expensive, and then you go, okay, we had to pull the whole stem, which will be very expensive because it's a few days to get it out and put it back in again. They went back in, and they met the lava coming up the drill hole. So this is active lava. It's alive, it's breathing, it's degassing, foaming, and so on. This means we can hit active lava and survive to talk about it.
This means that we have a potential of choosing to hit active lava. With high temperature sensors, which are being improved every year, we may even have the chance to go into active lava and stay in there and put sensors into the magma at depth. And this is basically the frontier that I'm trying to sell to you. This will be done, and it will change us from a field of geoscientific observation of the consequences of volcanic eruptions and volcanic unrest into a field of, first, direct observation in the sense of a deep observatory. And then, you're young enough to take this, just imagine what would be the next step in a science fiction book, right? If you can go in there, and if you can measure everything that's going on in there, what's the next step? Change something. Intervene. So the idea could be that you might even be able to intervene in a magmatic system, which would be a whole new world. And if I had to describe it to you by historical analog, I would say the following. It's kind of like the transition between medicine in the antique and medicine in the modern. You may know from your education that in Roman times and in Greek times, they were not allowed to open up bodies. All the medicine that they had to do was by inferences from the surface of the subject. And it's said that the greatest advances were made by doctors who were allowed to go into the Roman Forum and look at the broken and wounded bodies of gladiators, right? So this is, and that's what we're doing in volcanology now. We're literally looking at the accidents. We're waiting to have some luck and to be able to interpret what happens when things go wrong. And then you look at the modern approach to medical research, where there is surgery, where there is intervention, where you take all the complexity of trying to deal with a disease like cancer, which is genetics, environment, behavior, accidents, yeah? Put it all together, and allow it to be the whole story of how these things can be predicted and perhaps mitigated. So that's the pitch. We're trying to get to this other side of the river. And if we do it, they will look back at us as being very primitive indeed in the way that we dealt with volcanics. It's been done at Krafla, as I said. Here you see a picture of what they hit. They drilled in and they hit active magma, and they got samples coming out of the volcano that they actually collected, which look exactly like the material that they would expect. Here it's chopped, so I'll move to the next one. So there are some surprising results of all of this. First of all, you see magma where you don't expect it. That makes us very nervous. Secondly, it's a very high permeability near the magma. As they approached the magma, they started to lose all of the water. It's called open hole. I mean, there's a lot of drilling in Mexico. Many of you may have had some experience. You know that if you're drilling for oil and you have open hole, usually you just shut it down, because you're drilling mud somewhere, you don't know where it's going, and it cannot be sustainable, okay? So this is what they had, open hole. They were losing all their water. It means that above the magma, there's a very permeable zone. Permeable is in principle good for geothermal power, right? The system has fracked itself into this state. You don't need to do it, yeah? There was no crystallization of this magma. The normal thing that happens when you cool down rocks is they become crystalline substances from a lava. But in this case, because of the chemistry and the kinetics, they could not crystallize. I mean, it's a pretty violent intervention to punch a hole into a magma, which has been sitting there for thousands of years. And it needs thousands of years to crystallize, perhaps. It's one of the things we could observe if we were sitting down there in the hole. But it certainly can't do it as just a result of punching into it. So it means that the magma maintains its state of viscous lava, which has been quenched to a glassy carapace around the drill core. And the other observation was it was a very abrupt transition from the hydrothermal zone into the magma. So these are all slides which have been produced by John Eichelberger to give you the propaganda of why it's doable, why it's not too expensive, and why it's worth doing. And I'll just skip through them because I don't want to go into all of them in detail, but I think the principle is very clear. You would have a thermal cycle in the magma, and you want to try to use the thermal cycle, the thermal cell, which is in the hydrothermally fractured rocks above the magma in order to get the geothermics out of there. We have the tremendous advantage in Iceland, I don't know if it's the same in this country, that the authority associated with the geothermal energy is the same as the authority responsible for volcanic eruptions. It's a huge chance for us in terms of the organizational engineering, shall we say. Okay. I just jump ahead. A few aspects of the magma system. You'd have a very high fraction of the system which would be magma, so it's not the same as trying to get geothermal energy from water out of a porous rock, because the porosity in a porous rock is a relatively small percentage, whereas the material you're trying to get the heat from is 95% of the system in the case of a magma, okay? So the efficiency should be high. Secondly, the energy density that you would expect to get, in other words, how much energy could I get out of there, is associated with the latent heat of crystallization of the magma, essentially, and that's a very substantial number. And thirdly, the transport of the system. If it's a magma, you've got convection working for you. If it's a solid rock of carbonate with some holes in it which water is stored in, the permeability may be such that there is no effective convection of the water. You're stuck. You have to wait for conduction to do the job, or you have to frack it in somehow, right? Okay, on the right you can see a picture of the borehole. They literally created a volcano on purpose. They drilled it, and this is the degassing and the ash coming up through the hole. So the dream is to create a test bed, a lava or magma test bed, an observatory at depth for magma. All of our observatories today do go to some depth. We drill holes to 100 meters and try to measure at depth what the signals are there, but it's highly concentrated at the surface. And it's a very frustrating problem for us to understand the magma at depth, because as I showed you, the gradient of properties between the surface and a few hundred meters to a kilometer is enormous. And so the idea is to create a magma test bed where we could actually develop a facility which would be maintained as an access point for people who want to do experiments on magma. It's the big dream. Yeah? When you're a guy and you reach a certain age, you start having these big dreams, right? So it's for the next generation, but I would put it to you that there is something out there which we will call volcanic geoengineering. It will be done very likely within the next decade, and I suspect that it's going to change the very nature of what we call today volcanology. Thank you very much.
Bueno, antes va a haber una sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Quien tenga alguna pregunta puede levantar la mano y les pasamos el micrófono.
Well, first, thank you very much for your very interesting and informative presentation. My question is, we're taught here that crystallization occurs, well, explains a lot of processes like metallogenic processes and differentiation processes in volcanic evolution and all those things. But you mentioned that the drilling that has been done in that place, I don't remember the name, has revealed to us that there is no crystallization in the magma, in the shallow magma. Why is that? Why does that occur?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in the whole cycle of magma, from its birth to its death, yeah, you go through cycles of time scale. When the liquids are formed in the earth at great depth by the melting of rock, this takes place on a time scale we don't know, but we suspect that it takes place on a time scale of hundreds of thousands of years to millions of years. Okay? Mountain building events, which are hundreds of millions of years, contain this cycle of magma development and volcanoes, such as we see them in the Andes. Yeah? So on this scale, on the long scale of time, crystallization, yes. Thermodynamics, more or less, yes. In fact, that is the whole structure of petrology. That's how we understand the crystalline state of rocks. It's based on thermodynamic equilibrium, which in highly viscous liquids requires a long, long, long time. But what you can view these volcanic systems as starting out very slowly, then transport, which is a slightly faster process, and then storage just below the volcano. And then that final ascent out the volcano is much faster. And on that time scale, for the chemistry of rocks in Iceland, it's very difficult for them to crystallize. And the simple observation that we get glass in ash is the proof that they cannot crystallize on the time scale of the final event. So what you see is lavas which have already suffered a lot of crystallization at depth, but then they come to a point that is so shallow that the timescale is accelerated beyond their equilibrium. And you basically walk out of an equilibrium world, which is petrology, into a disequilibrium world, which is volcanology. I could put it as, I'm trained as a petrologist, believe me, that's about as simple as you can put it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, I thank you as well for your presentation, and I want to ask you, what do you think is the most interesting zone in the world to study volcanoes, and why do you think it is? Thank you.
The most interesting place?
Yes.
This is an extremely difficult question to answer. It's a little bit like being asked, what is your favorite volcano? Yeah. And of course, as an experimentalist, I positively refuse to have a favorite volcano because I'm an opportunist, totally. So I'll go wherever the opportunity lies in terms of recent activity, samples, access, and so on. Yeah? But what I talked to you about here is a very shallow situation. 2.5 kilometers is, for the things which drive eruptions, very shallow, okay? This is only the beginning. If we can go to 2.5 kilometers and simply observe how this thing cools, crystallizes, all the processes that we think we know, that we think we can model, and just check them, then there would be a great advance. But beyond that, of course, there are far deeper processes, which, looking at it from the year 2019, I think anybody would agree seem impossible for us to reach. But if you had said 20 years ago, I want to drill a volcano, then no geoscientist probably would go on record as accepting the idea as a good investment, okay? So things do change. They tend to change over a decadal time scale, and of course it's all driven, as most of the physical sciences, it's all driven by advances in technology, which allow us new observations and new methods of access.
¿Alguna otra?
Gracias. Good afternoon, and thank you for your excellent presentation. Well, I have a question. It's about when you compared the modern volcanology with modern medicine, do you think that in a recent future we will be able to, let's say, prevent or perhaps delay volcanic eruptions or like explosive events?
It's impossible for me to say. It's literally impossible for me to say. Volcanic eruptions, we say volcanic eruptions and we describe a tremendous range of phenomena, actually. We are guilty of a very simplistic terminology, because a volcanic eruption can be a very minor explosion which throws a few boulders out, a few bombs. It can be a single lava flow, or it can be an entire mountain which throws thousands of cubic kilometers of dense rock equivalent, great phrase, dense rock equivalent of ash into the atmosphere, and possibly wipes out, causes extinctions of different species. So do I think we can stop something on the scale of thousands of cubic kilometers? It seems to me, standing here today, impossible. But the year is 2019, who knows? Yeah? Do I think that we can play with the timing of events that are coming out of a rift in Krafla, or change the total magnitude of what has erupted? I think the question is worth asking.
Thank you.
¿Alguna otra?
Excuse me, sir. Can you think, can we shall one day, can we explore the energy? Can we use this energy from the volcanoes to our benefits?
Yeah, it's of course a very interesting question. So thermally, yes, today we use thermal energy, right? I mean, we do have geothermal production from volcanic fields today. Whether we could ever use this energy involved with the decompression, I've never been asked that question before. It's a very interesting question. I don't have an answer.
Good afternoon. It calls my attention to see your title, and I would like to ask if instead of this, it's just volcanology to geothermal engineering in other dimension. It was a great case from Mexico. In 1980, the studies about the Chichonal volcano, which were an area which was abandoned to drill a well to produce energy. After that, the eruption showed us that it was a good decision. And after 2010, in Iceland, drilled kind of deep, and they melt the drilling equipment. Even though they were pushing water cold water to high pressure. After that experiences, what else can you tell us about this?
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So let me interpret your question or rephrase your question. We have sufficient reasons not to drill volcanic terrains. The only question is, will we have sufficient reasons to balance those and to go forward anyway, despite the potential danger? There is not only the economic reason for wanting to drill these systems associated with the geothermal energy, it is also associated with it, of course, the scientific questions. And of course, the impact and the economic benefit of answering the scientific questions is always much more difficult to answer. But if you would go into a system such as that, you could consider to make a sacrificial technology which you would send down, would never come back up, but which could be accompanied by enough sensors and would last long enough that it would be worth the mission. This last picture that I have up here is because my colleague, Mr. Eichelberger, is a very sarcastic man, and whenever people tell him he cannot do it, he says, "We can't do it?" He said, "Do you realize what we already do?" He said, the Russians send, of course, the Venera probes to Venus when I was a young man. And they were on the surface being corroded away at over 400 degrees Celsius, but for a time they sent back signals from their sensors, famously. So can we go there? We can go there. Will it potentially go wrong? Yes, potentially it will go wrong. But at the same time, we will never know where the boundary is between reliable or unreliable attempts unless we go this way.
Okay, una pregunta más.
Well, thank you very much for this presentation, and my question has really been mentioned. Well, what I'm going to make right now is, since we are in a very strategic location, for example, the whole Pacific coast, which is basically the belt of fire, is it possible that all these states that are in that area can be replaced with the geothermal energy? For example, it was mentioned that in Iceland, it was actually being
being the principal source of energy for that country? Is it really viable? Is it really expensive? Can we actually get to that point?
Yeah. I have to say, and you probably know, I mean, I'm not an expert on the economics of geothermal energy at all, okay? So there's nothing I can say to you which would be reliable in that regard. All I can make is the observation from a geological point of view that the potential, geologically speaking, in South America and in Latin America in general is enormous. And I mean, people here and engineers here have known that for decades now. I don't know what the growth curve of geothermal energy is, but I know that much more attention is being put in that direction, for example, in Chile. So where it will all end, what fraction of your energy budget it will be, that has to do with many, many economic things which are not directly scientific things, and it's just a question that I'm completely incompetent to answer.
Muchas gracias, doctor Donald. Un aplauso, por favor, para él. Muchas gracias por esta plática, muchas gracias por su generosidad. Finalmente vamos a tener unas palabras del director del Instituto de Geofísica, el ingeniero Hugo Delgado. Muchas gracias.
Sí, bueno, yo nada más quería, para finalizar, dar las gracias a la Facultad de Ingeniería por su hospitalidad y a todos ustedes por haber estado el día de hoy. Realmente es un placer tener a un visitante tan distinguido y sobre todo un honor tener a una personalidad como la de Don Dingwell dándonos esta charla en la que pues básicamente la idea es acercar a personas que tienen este perfil tan alto en contacto con ustedes, con la gente joven a la que realmente queremos llamar, atraer para trabajar con ustedes desde el Instituto de Geofísica y obviamente si en un momento dado se da la oportunidad, ¿por qué no?, en la Universidad de Múnich. Y pues nuevamente, thank you very much, Don, y pues lo despedimos nuevamente con un aplauso. Si me...
Thank you very much, everyone. Very nice. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry for everything I said. You know, for the young people.
Actually, that's what I meant at the end.
Okay.
That what we wanted to do in bringing you here was to be in touch with the young people. Yeah. And at some point, we would like this kind of talk to attract them to come to the Institute of Geophysics and at some point come to the University of Munich.
Okay.
That's what I said.
Super, super. Thank you. Thank you, Hugo.
Yeah, there were very interesting questions.
The great thing is you get completely different questions from engineers. That's the nice thing. Thank you.